66 days into the investigation, and the case has just fractured wide open. In a single week, more leads have surfaced than in the entire previous month combined. New images have been recovered from the security cameras at the residence, providing a fresh look at the scene. Simultaneously, 2 new ransom notes have emerged, both claiming to know the victim's location and the identity of her abductors. These notes were delivered the very same day a high-profile family member made her return to the public eye. Investigators are now pivoting their strategy, shifting a heavy forensic focus toward 2 specific areas of the home that may have been overlooked: the bedroom and the garage. I am Michelle, and this is the Michelle Report. Subscribe now as we piece together every active dimension of this investigation in one place. Let us start with what matters most: the new camera images. Multiple news outlets confirm that new images have been recovered from cameras positioned at Nancy Guthrie's home. The specific details of what those images contain, which camera or cameras produced them, and what time period they cover have not been publicly disclosed by law enforcement. But the recovery itself is significant, because the initial frustration in this investigation centered heavily on the limits of what existing footage could show. The Google Nest camera at Nancy's front door was the source of the primary surveillance footage: the masked figure, the backpack, the foliage placed over the lens. What was always understood but less publicly examined is that additional cameras existed on the property, including at the back of the house. Reports earlier in the investigation confirmed that investigators had recovered images from all 3 cameras at the home, though officials said at the time that nothing of immediate note had been found. What has now changed is unclear, whether these are entirely new recoveries from the same cameras, additional images extracted through the same kind of cloud mining process that produced the January 11th imagery from Google's servers, or something else entirely. What is clear is that investigators are actively pursuing new visual evidence. And visual evidence in this case, even a single frame, a partial image, an additional angle on the property from a different date, could produce the specific detail that moves everything else forward. The Google Nest recovery earlier in the investigation proved what was possible: a camera that had been disabled, no active subscription, and yet Google's server infrastructure retained imagery that investigators were able to extract. Imagery that produced the January 11th surveillance visit evidence, one of the most significant developments in the entire case. If that process is producing additional images now, the public will likely not know what those images contain until investigators are ready to use them. That is appropriate. That is how active federal investigations work. But the fact that the process is ongoing, that the technical work of recovering visual evidence from this property has not stopped, is a meaningful development at day 66. Now let us talk about the bedroom, because forensic experts covering this case have identified it as a location that was almost certainly the point of initial contact between Nancy Guthrie, whoever took her, and as a location that may hold evidence that has not yet been fully recovered. Crime scene expert and former homicide detective Chris McDaniel made an observation that sounds simple but carries real investigative weight. When you look at footage of the interior of Nancy's home, footage that appeared in connection with Savannah's visits, and that is available from Today Show recordings, you can see the specific pattern of her bedroom: the side of the bed she slept on, the alarm clock, the books, the chair where she likely sat to ease herself up in the mornings, her hearing aids nearby. All of those details establish what investigators call a pattern of life, the behavioral routine that defines exactly where a person is at specific moments of their day and night. And in the context of an abduction from a bed at 2 a.m., that pattern tells investigators something critical: where the perpetrator had to be, which side of the bed, which angle of approach, which surfaces they had to touch in order to establish control over Nancy Guthrie in those first moments. If someone came to her bedside in the dark at 2 a.m., woke her up, subdued her, guided or carried her out, that control zone between the bed and the wall is where their biological trace would be: touch DNA deposited from skin cells on the wrist, the forearm, any area not covered by gloves, hair, transfer evidence from the bedding, footwear impressions on the floor. Forensic professor Joe Scott Morgan described the critical importance of that area in terms that are worth understanding. In a space like that, if you do not secure it and treat it as a surgical suite from the first moment of investigation, the evidence is lost, not degraded, lost. Touch DNA is extraordinarily fragile. Footwear impressions in dust are invisible to the naked eye and require specific technology to recover. Hair is affected by air movement, cleaning, and traffic. If that bedroom was walked through before forensic teams had a chance to work it completely, If the scene was treated as a search and rescue situation rather than a crime scene in those first critical hours, then some of what that room could have told investigators is already gone, but some may still be there, and investigators are now, according to reporting, focusing renewed attention specifically on that space, which means they believe there is still something to find. The garage is the other location now receiving focused investigative attention, and the reasons are both forensic and logistical. Nancy Guthrie rarely used her front door. By multiple accounts and by the evidence of her own routine, she used the garage. Pull in, hit the button, door goes down, enter through the garage. It is the entry and exit pattern of millions of American homeowners, particularly those who have lived in the same house for 50 years and have long since stopped thinking consciously about their own security habits. The garage door closed at approximately 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, after Annie's husband brought Nancy home from dinner. That documented closure is one of the digital anchors of the timeline. It confirms she made it home. It marks the beginning of the window during which someone was waiting inside, or during which someone gained access after she arrived. Her blue Subaru was in the garage. It was eventually towed for analysis, but not until 6 days after Nancy disappeared. 6 days during which that garage was not treated as a controlled evidence environment. 6 days during which whatever forensic trace might have existed on the floor, the walls, the door control panel, or the surfaces inside that enclosed space was subject to whatever entered it. Nancy Grace and her panel raised a specific and technically significant question: could the garage door have been hacked? The answer, confirmed by multiple technical experts, is yes. Garage doors operate on low-frequency radio waves, typically in the 300 to 400 megahertz range. The coded signals that tell your door to open or close can, with the right equipment, be intercepted, cloned, and replicated. The technology to do this is not science fiction. Demonstrations of this vulnerability have been publicly documented using off-the-shelf consumer electronics. Brute force attacks on fixed code systems can cycle through the possible codes systematically until the door opens. If someone hacked Nancy Guthrie's garage door prior to her return on January 31st, it would give them access to her home through a point that had no camera coverage, that she likely did not think to check, and that would not show forced entry anywhere on the property. It would explain the absence of any broken locks or damaged frames, and it would expand the category of people investigators need to consider beyond those who had a key or knew about an unlocked door. The critical investigative question: does the garage doors system maintain a log of every open and close event? If it does, and if a hack bypassed the standard signaling protocol, investigators may be able to determine whether the door was opened at an unusual time before Nancy came home or while she was there without the clicker or the control panel inside the house. That is the thread investigators are working. The ransom note situation just became significantly more complicated and significantly more analytically interesting. 2 new communications arrived at TMZ the same day Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show. Same day, same person who had been writing to TMZ throughout the investigation, a source described by Harvey Levin as someone who has been incessantly contacting them, who stopped writing for about a month and then sent 2 new messages in a single day on Monday. The content of these messages: the person claims to know who the kidnappers are, plural, more than one, and claims to know where Nancy Guthrie is. They allege she was last seen alive in the state of Sonora, Mexico. They allege she is now dead, and they are demanding half a Bitcoin, approximately $34,000 at current rates, in exchange for identifying the kidnappers and their location. The Bitcoin account they provided has been verified by TMZ as a real account. As of the latest reporting, no funds have been deposited into it. Now here is the analytical framework that matters before going any further. This person is making a critical distinction. They are not claiming to be the kidnapper. They are claiming to have peripheral knowledge, to have seen Nancy with the kidnappers in Sonora, and to now be willing to identify those individuals in exchange for payment. That framing matters because it defines the legal exposure differently. Claiming to be the kidnapper means admitting to a federal crime. Claiming to have seen the victim with the kidnappers means claiming to be a witness who wants to profit from their knowledge. Harvey Levin, who is a trained lawyer and who has reviewed these communications directly, made a point that several analysts found genuinely interesting. Why did this person initially say time was of the essence, suggesting urgency, suggesting Nancy was alive, and then the very next day write again to say time was no longer of the essence? If you are running a pure scam, you maintain urgency. Urgency is leverage. The moment you say time is no longer of the essence, you are reducing the pressure on the potential payer, which is not what a scammer does. Levin's read. That shift in language suggests the person learned something. that the urgency existed when Nancy was alive, and the urgency disappeared when she was not. That is not proof. That is one analyst's reading of the language pattern, but it is a pattern worth noting. The question of why this person is writing to TMZ instead of calling the FBI tip line and demanding $34,000 instead of claiming the $1 million plus reward has a specific and revealing answer. Cold case detective Brian Martin, who solved a decades-old child murder using genetic genealogy, addressed this directly. His read: the person writing these notes is someone who exists in the same social ecosystem as the people who took Nancy Guthrie. They know something because of who they know, and they are afraid that claiming the reward through official channels, going to the FBI, cooperating formally with law enforcement, would expose not just the kidnappers but themselves. In their reasoning, claiming the official reward means being identified. Being identified means investigators start looking at everything else in their life. And if you are connected to people who commit violent kidnappings, there is almost certainly something else in your life that you do not want investigators to find. The Bitcoin route, in this person's calculation, offers anonymity. Pay me in cryptocurrency to an account that was set up without identity verification, and I give you a name and a location without anyone knowing I was involved. That logic is not irrational. It is also not honest, and it is not how the FBI works. Blockchain intelligence specialist David Richards confirmed the relevant technical reality. An email address can potentially be traced through header analysis and metadata, even if it was created as a burner account, particularly if that account has sent multiple messages over a period of months, creating a pattern of data points. A Bitcoin address, while technically public and permanently recorded on the blockchain, only yields usable identity information when funds are moved and eventually reach a centralized exchange that maintains Know Your Customer records. The FBI has already been given all of the communications by TMZ. They have had them throughout the investigation. The technical work of tracing the email origin and monitoring the Bitcoin address is almost certainly already underway. What has not happened, according to Harvey Levin's public statements, is the FBI telling the family to pay. That tells you exactly how seriously the Bureau is taking these specific communications as a credible pathway to finding Nancy Guthrie. The distinction between the TMZ notes and the two ransom notes that Savannah Guthrie believes are genuine is critical and has not been explained clearly enough in most coverage. There are two separate categories of communication. Category 1, the original ransom notes sent in the days immediately after the abduction. 2 of them went to local Tucson television stations and to TMZ through the website submission form, not email, not direct contact, but through a standard web form. These notes contain details about the interior of Nancy Guthrie's home. They made specific demands, they included deadlines, and they threatened harm to Nancy Guthrie if the demands were not met. Savannah Guthrie said publicly that she tends to believe these 2 notes are real. Harvey Levin confirmed that the FBI believes these 2 notes are also real. These are believed to be from the actual perpetrators. Category 2, the TMZ communications that have been arriving repeatedly throughout the investigation, most recently on Monday. These are from someone claiming not to be the kidnapper, but to have seen Nancy with the kidnappers. These are the ones demanding half a Bitcoin. These are the ones that are analytically interesting, but that the FBI has not told the family to respond to. Understanding that these are 2 completely separate categories from different senders with different claimed relationships to the crime is essential for following what is actually happening in the ransom dimension of this case. The perpetrator communications stopped. The FBI has them. They believe they are real. The question of why the perpetrators stopped communicating, why no proof of life was ever provided, and why the ransom was never completed, despite Savannah's stated willingness to pay, remains one of the most significant unanswered questions in this entire investigation. Fort Wayne cold case detective Brian Martin, drawing on his own experience with a case that ultimately took 30 years to solve through genetic genealogy, offered the analysis that many investigators have privately acknowledged as the most likely explanation. The plan was to take Nancy, demand ransom, collect the money, and release her. What changed that plan, most likely, was that something went wrong with Nancy's health during or immediately after the abduction. She had serious back pain. She was 84 years old. She was taken in her pajamas without her medication. She was subjected to the physiological stress of a violent kidnapping in the middle of the night. If she died before the ransom was collected, or before proof of life could be provided, the entire leverage model of the kidnapping collapsed. The perpetrators suddenly found themselves not in a profitable extortion situation, but in a potential felony murder case. At that point, collecting the ransom becomes evidence. Coming forward becomes confession. Disappearing becomes the only rational option. That is the theory that explains the silence better than any other. Savannah Guthrie walked back into the Today Show on Monday morning in a yellow dress. Harvey Levin on TMZ Live noticed the color immediately. Yellow ribbons, the symbol of waiting for someone to come home. Whether that was intentional or not, whether Savannah chose that color with that meaning in mind, only she knows. But the image of her walking through those studio doors in yellow, saying it is good to be home, greeting the crowd outside with signs that said, "Bring her home," it landed with a weight that the people who have been following this case for 66 days felt immediately. NBC staff were given specific instructions ahead of her return. The guidance from the network was to keep her first day back as normal as possible, to not make the morning about her mother's disappearance, to not put Savannah in the position of having to address it on air on her first day back at work. Her colleagues were told to follow her lead. If she brought it up, they would be present with her. If she did not, they would proceed with the show. She chose not to bring it up on air on that first morning. She said, "It is good to be home." She said, "Ready or not, let's do the news." And she did the news. Why, that decision to show up, to be present, to do the work while carrying what she is carrying, is one that takes more from a person than most people watching from the outside can fully measure. A Wisconsin couple traveled to Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home specifically to pray at the memorial that has been growing outside the house. The banner at KVOA, where Savannah once worked, continues to collect signatures from people across the country. The community that has gathered around this case in Tucson, across Arizona, across the country, has not moved on, and neither has the family, neither has the investigation. The sheriff question has generated another new layer, and it is one that goes directly to the question of whether this investigation has been corrupted at the leadership level. Sheriff Chris Nanos is now facing allegations that he abused his authority for political gain. According to reporting, a new probe has been opened into his conduct, separate from the recall effort, separate from the no confidence vote, separate from the TSA gun incident, specifically examining whether his actions as sheriff were shaped by political considerations rather than law enforcement imperatives. Nanos has pushed back publicly on the characterization of his investigators as inexperienced, specifically addressing the allegation that the supervisor who responded to Nancy Guthrie's home had never worked a homicide. His response, according to reporting, attempts to set the record straight on his investigators' experience levels, though the specific details of how he addressed that particular allegation have not been fully disclosed publicly. What has been consistent across every insider account, every source close to the investigation, every former law enforcement professional who has weighed in, the early decisions made at this scene were not the decisions that an experienced, homicide-focused team would have made, whether that reflects the investigators themselves, their supervision, or the leadership environment created by the person at the top of the department. The result is the same. Evidence was not preserved the way it should have been. The crime scene was not treated with the urgency the evidence in front of investigators demanded, and the case has been paying for those first hours ever since. A former prosecutor speaking publicly about this investigation said something that deserves to be heard clearly. This case could take years to solve, not because the evidence does not exist, but because of how the evidence was handled in those first critical hours. Investigations compromised at the scene level can be solved, and frequently are through subsequent forensic development, but they take longer, they require more resources, they require the kind of patience that a family living in agony and wondering every single night finds extraordinarily difficult to sustain. Here is the full picture at day 66. New images have been recovered from cameras at Nancy Guthrie's home. The nature and content of those images is not yet public, but investigators are working them. The bedroom and the garage are receiving renewed forensic focus, two locations that may contain biological trace evidence, footwear impressions, and garage door access data that could still tell investigators things the initial scene processing did not capture. Two new Ransom communications arrived at TMZ on the day Savannah went back to work. A third-party source, not the kidnapper, but someone claiming peripheral knowledge, demanding cryptocurrency, and claiming Nancy is dead and in Sonora, Mexico. The FBI has all of it. The Bitcoin account is being monitored. The email origin is being worked. The credibility of the specific claims is being assessed. The two original ransom notes, the ones from whoever actually took Nancy, are believed to be genuine by both Savannah and by the FBI. Those perpetrators have gone silent. The most analytically consistent explanation for that silence is the darkest one, that something went wrong with Nancy's health before the ransom was ever collected, and that the plan collapsed before it could be completed. The investigation is not cold. Former cold case detective Brian Martin said it plainly. 60 days out is not cold. There are still leads being processed. There are still tips to vet. There is still DNA in 2 labs. There are still physical samples collected from detained individuals available for comparison. There is still cell tower data and digital evidence being worked 1 warrant at a time. And there is a $1 million+ reward sitting unclaimed, anonymous, no arrest required, no conviction required. Someone in this country, maybe someone who has been writing to TMZ, maybe someone who knows what happened and is afraid of what full cooperation would cost them, is sitting on the answer. The FBI tip line is 1-800-KEY-ALL-FBI. You can remain anonymous. 1 call. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her daughter walked back into work on Monday in a yellow dress and said, "Ready or not, let's do the news," and then did it. She is not giving up. Neither is the investigation. Neither are we. If this video gave you something, share it right now. Like it so more people find it. And if the Mitchell Report is new to you, this is what we do here. We go deeper. We stay longer. We fight for the cases that matter. I am Mitchell. This is the Mitchell Report. Thank you for watching.